In the early hours of September 7, 2012, the town of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, lay wrapped in quiet. Streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalks, and the final echoes of college nightlife faded into silence. But somewhere behind a second-story apartment door just off the University of North Carolina campus, something irreversible was unfolding. 19-year-old Faith Danielle Hedgepeth had been full of life just hours earlier. A freshman at UNC, she was more than just another bright-eyed college student. She was a symbol of hope. Born into the Holly-Wasaponi tribe, Faith carried the dreams of her community on her shoulders. Her father, Roland Hedgepeth, had spoken often of her sense of purpose. She wanted to be a pediatrician. She wanted to return home one day, to give back, to heal, to serve. Faith had every reason to believe she could do it. She had a full scholarship, an open heart, and a sharp mind. She was the kind of student who always raised her hand in class, the kind of friend who stayed late to help you cram, the kind of daughter who called just to say, "I love you." Her laugh was contagious, her presence magnetic. But in the quiet hours before sunrise, that light was extinguished. Faith shared an off-campus apartment with her friend, Karina Rosario. The two had been close for over a year, part roommates, part sisters. They studied together, partied together, even confided in each other about boys and broken hearts. But things hadn't been perfect. Their friendship, like many forged in the pressure cooker of young adulthood, had its cracks. Faith had confided in others about feeling uneasy. Specifically, she was uncomfortable with Karina's on and off boyfriend, Brandon Edwards. He had a reputation, short temper, jealous nature. More than once, Faith had played mediator in their heated arguments. She tried to keep the peace, but lately, she'd begun to feel caught in the crossfire. On the night of September 6th, Faith and Karina decided to take a break from studying and head out. They got dressed up and went to the Thrill, a local nightclub popular with UNC students. Surveillance cameras caught them arriving just after midnight, smiling, arm in arm, like nothing in the world could touch them. They danced, drank, and laughed as the music pulsed around them. On the outside, it looked like any other college night out. But at some point during those early morning hours, something shifted. Around 2:30 a.m., the two returned to their apartment. According to Karina, everything seemed normal. Faith went to bed. Karina would later tell police she left the apartment again around 4:25 a.m., leaving Faith alone. When she returned nearly 7 hours later, everything had changed. Faith was no longer breathing. She was lying on the floor, half naked, brutally beaten, wrapped in a blood-soaked quilt. The horror of that scene would stay with investigators, and with the community, for years. But in that moment, as news began to trickle out that a UNC student had been murdered in her own home, one question echoed louder than the rest. How could this have happened? And more importantly, why? Faith Hedgepeth had come to Chapel Hill to chase a dream. By sunrise, she had become the center of a nightmare. It had started like any other night out, loud music, flashing lights, the hum of youth spilling onto the sidewalks of Chapel Hill. After a long evening of studying, Faith and her roommate Karina Rosario were ready for a break. Their destination, the Thrill, a popular club just off Franklin Street, where college students crowded into dim corners and danced their worries away. Surveillance footage from that night would later show the girls walking in just after midnight. Faith wore a soft smile, her hair tucked behind her ears, eyes alert and full of energy. She moved confidently, laughing beside Karina, blending into a sea of students. At a glance, they were just two best friends enjoying a Thursday night. But beneath the surface, not everything was as carefree as it appeared. Faith had told friends in recent days that something didn't feel right. More specifically, she felt uncomfortable around Karina's ex-boyfriend, Brandon Edwards. Their relationship had been rocky for some time, intense, volatile, and unpredictable. Faith, always the peacemaker, had often tried to intervene when things got out of hand between them. But lately, she had started to feel like a target. Faith's unease wasn't just intuition. Brandon was known for his temper. And according to messages later recovered, he had grown possessive, not only of Karina, but of the people around her. Especially Faith. Still, that night at the Thrill, there were no open confrontations. The music was too loud, the drinks too strong, and the crowd too thick for anything obvious to unfold. At around 2:06 a.m., security cameras caught Faith and Karina leaving the club together. The timestamp would become critical later, because it was one of the last verified moments Faith was seen alive. They returned to their apartment shortly after 2:30 a.m. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. According to Karina, they settled in. Faith, she said, went straight to bed. But just 2 hours later, something strange happened. At 4:25 a.m., Karina left the apartment again. She would later tell police she was going to see another friend. She said Faith was sleeping when she left, that everything seemed normal. She didn't return until hours later. Around 11 a.m., Karina walked back into the apartment, but this time, she wasn't alone. She had brought a friend with her. Maybe she felt something was off. Maybe she already knew. What they found inside was beyond anything they could have prepared for. Faith's bedroom was in disarray. Blood soaked the walls and seeped into the floor. Her body lay wrapped in a twisted quilt, half naked, brutally beaten. And then there was the note. Scrawled in lipstick on a takeout bag, just a few feet from her body, were the words, "I'm not stupid, bitch." Karina called 911. Her voice on the emergency recording was breathless, shaken, barely holding together. She kept repeating the same words, as if saying them might make them less true. "I think my friend is dead. I just walked in, and there's blood everywhere." The questions would start immediately. Why did she leave Faith alone that night? Why bring someone with her to return? And most chilling of all, who else had been inside that apartment while the world slept? The scene inside apartment 1502 was unlike anything first responders expected that morning. When officers entered the bedroom just past 11:30 a.m. on September 7, 2012, they were met with a silence so thick it felt unnatural, the kind of silence that hangs in the air after something terrible has happened. Faith Hedgepeth's body lay partially concealed beneath a quilt. She was half naked, twisted awkwardly on the floor beside her bed. The bedroom told a story, but it wasn't a story anyone wanted to believe. Blood was splattered across the walls, soaking the mattress, pooling near her head. It was clear she had been bludgeoned to death, but with what, no one could say for sure in those first moments. The force used against her was severe, personal. There was rage behind every strike, not the work of a stranger who panicked, but someone who stayed long enough to destroy. Then they saw it, the note. It wasn't on paper. Instead, someone had scrawled a message on a fast food takeout bag using red lipstick. The words were jagged, slanted, frantic. "I'm not stupid, bitch." That single sentence would haunt the case for years. Was it a confession? A threat? A warning? The message didn't match the rest of the scene. It was theatrical, almost taunting, as if the killer wanted it found. As if they wanted it to be read. Officers quickly began piecing together the immediate facts. Faith's car was still outside, parked in its usual spot. Nothing appeared to be stolen, not from the apartment, not from her vehicle. But two critical things were missing: her laptop and her cell phone. No one knew where they had gone. The apartment showed no sign of forced entry. The front door was unlocked when Karina and her friend returned that morning. That raised even more questions. Had Faith let someone in that night? Did she know her killer? As investigators worked, they quickly decided to withhold many of the details from the public. This would prove to be a controversial choice. In the days and weeks that followed, little official information was released. Rumors filled the silence, on campus, in the media, online. And some of the first statements from those involved didn't seem to line up. Karina told police she'd left the apartment at 4:25 a.m., that she'd gone to another friend's place. When she left, Faith was asleep, but law enforcement wouldn't confirm much. Nor would they say whether anyone else had been seen entering or leaving the building in the hours before Faith was found. Still, something about the crime scene made investigators believe the attack hadn't been random. The brutality, the message, the missing electronics. They suspected someone close to Faith, or at least someone familiar with her, had done this. But then, in the middle of the confusion, something surfaced. A small but deeply unsettling piece of evidence that would change the tone of the investigation entirely. A voicemail. One that no one expected. Supposedly, it had been left accidentally, a pocket dial, sent to a friend's phone in the middle of the night. The timestamp placed it right around the estimated time of Faith's murder. At first, it didn't seem like much. Just static. Distorted noise. But when audio experts enhanced the file, what emerged was haunting. A woman's voice, panicked, frightened. The second voice, male, angry. A third, maybe another woman. Then something else entirely. A series of sounds. Muffled. Rhythmic. Like something, or someone, being struck. And then a scream. The voicemail was just over a minute long. It didn't include names. No clear context. But to many, it felt like a window into the exact moment Faith Hedgepeth was killed. And if that were true, it meant someone had caught a murder on tape. It began as a rumor, a whisper in online forums, a thread buried deep in the corners of the internet. A voicemail. Mysterious. Disturbing. Maybe even damning. For a long time, no one knew if it was real. But then it surfaced. Not through official channels, not through police briefings or news stations, but as a leaked audio file posted anonymously online. The file name was cryptic. The description even more so. Voicemail left around time of death. Listen closely. At first, it sounded like static, distorted, chaotic, unremarkable. Just background noise. But as listeners pressed in, something began to take shape. Beneath the fuzz, there were voices. Real voices. Humans. Emotional. And one of them sounded like Faith Hedgepeth. Forensic audio experts were brought in. They combed through every second of the clip, slowing it down, filtering frequencies, isolating words. The official file was just over a minute long. But within that minute lived what some would come to believe was the sound of a murder in progress. A female voice, desperate, scared, pleaded over the noise. A male voice barked back, low and forceful. Another female voice entered the mix, louder, more aggressive, maybe angry. It was hard to tell exactly who was speaking or in what order, but one sentence stood out from the chaos. "I think she needs help." Some claimed you could hear the word Karina. Others believed the name Eric was whispered. Nothing was confirmed. The quality was too poor, too degraded. But no one could deny the emotion. And then came the sounds that no one could unhear. A soft thump. Then another. Rhythmic. Heavy. Was it a fist? A blunt object? A sudden scream pierced the static. High, sharp, unmistakably human. The final moments were a blur of noise. Voices overlapping, a loud crashing sound, then silence. Just static again, like the tape itself had recoiled from what it had captured. The voicemail had originally been left on the phone of one of Faith's friends, likely the result of a butt dial or accidental call. The timestamp matched the early hours of September 7th, right in the window between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m., the same time police believe Faith was killed. The leak of that voicemail sparked a firestorm online. Reddit threads exploded. YouTube videos analyzed it frame by frame. Amateur sleuths built elaborate timelines. They dissected every syllable, every background hum, trying to extract the truth from the static. Many were convinced this was it. This was Faith's murder, caught on tape. But not everyone agreed. Some experts warned that the audio was too unclear to be trusted. Our brains, they said, are wired to find patterns, to make meaning where there may be none. Was it really Faith's voice? Or just someone who sounded like her? Was that a scream, or just distortion? Was the message, "I think she needs help," or something entirely different? The Chapel Hill police never officially confirmed the voicemail's contents. They wouldn't say whether it had been authenticated or ruled out. But privately, many believed it held more weight than anyone was willing to admit publicly. Because if the voicemail was real, if it was indeed recorded during Faith's final moments, then someone else had been in that room. Someone who argued. Someone who screamed. Someone who was killed. The voicemail didn't offer answers. Not yet. But it did offer one terrifying possibility. Faith Hedgepeth's final moments weren't just remembered. They were recorded. As the weeks turned into months, and the months into years, one thing became painfully clear: the murder of Faith Hedgepeth was not going to be solved quickly. The initial wave of shock in Chapel Hill had long since settled into something heavier: confusion, suspicion, and silence. The longer it dragged on, the more the public began asking the questions the police weren't answering. And when answers didn't come, theories filled the void. At the center of it all was Karina Rosario. She was the last known person to see Faith alive. She was her roommate, her friend, the one who said she left the apartment at 4:25 a.m. and returned 7 hours later with someone else, not alone. Why did she need another person to come with her? Why did she leave Faith sleeping, only to return at 11 a.m. after so much time had passed? Her behavior, to many, felt strange. The timing was odd. And then there was her 911 call, anxious, breathless, yet oddly composed in moments. To some, it sounded like genuine panic. To others, something rehearsed. Police never named Karina as a suspect, but the questions surrounding her never truly went away. Then there was Brandon Edwards, Karina's ex-boyfriend. The one Faith had been wary of. The one she had tried to keep at a distance. Known to be possessive, Brandon had a reputation for jealousy that many who knew the trio were already aware of. And Faith, being the loyal friend she was, had tried to step in, tried to calm the chaos between him and Karina. But not everyone appreciates a peacemaker. Did Brandon resent Faith for getting involved? Did he see her as the one pulling Karina away from him? Police did speak with Brandon in the early stages of the investigation. He denied involvement. No charges were filed. Still, his name stayed on everyone's lips. And then there was Enrique Eric Jones, a close friend of Faith's, maybe more. Some believed there was a romantic connection between them. Others thought he had hoped for one. He was interviewed extensively, and for a time, public suspicion pointed his way too. But then came the lab results. DNA collected from the scene didn't match Eric. It didn't match Brandon either. In 2014, 2 years after the murder, investigators released a partial male DNA profile to the public, a genetic fingerprint pulled from the crime scene. But they didn't say who it belonged to. There was no match in any national database. No arrest. No face to connect to the sample. The evidence was real. It placed a man inside Faith's bedroom on the night of the murder. But without a name, it meant nothing. The trail had gone cold. And as the case dragged on, faith in justice began to falter. Leads dried up. Media coverage slowed. The police said they were working quietly behind the scenes. But the community, and Faith's family, were starting to wonder if the silence meant the case was slipping away. And somewhere out there, her killer was still free. The silence from investigators didn't sit well with Faith Hedgepeth's family, especially not with her father, Roland. He had been patient at first, believing the police were doing all they could behind closed doors. But as days turned to months, and then into years with no arrests, Roland's hope began to turn into frustration. He started speaking out, not with anger, but with a deep, aching urgency. He believed the police knew more than they were saying. Time and again, Roland sat before cameras and microphones, his voice steady but his eyes hollow. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted answers. Who had taken his daughter's life? Who had left her beaten, bloodied, and humiliated in her own home? Why, after all this time, did no one seem closer to the truth? The Chapel Hill community, once shocked into silence, began to stir again. Faith had been loved, not just by her friends at UNC, but by an entire community that watched her grow up. Her tribe, the Haliwasaponi, held vigils in her memory. Candles were lit. Prayers were spoken. And still, no justice came. One phrase kept echoing through the air. Who would want to hurt her? It was a question that seemed impossible to answer. Faith wasn't involved in anything dangerous. She didn't live recklessly. She had no enemies, no secret life. She was simply a young woman chasing a dream, and someone had ended that dream in the most brutal way imaginable. In 2016, nearly 4 years after her murder, national attention returned in a big way. ABC's 2020 aired a full-length episode devoted entirely to Faith's case. It told the story with chilling clarity, from the lipstick message to the leaked voicemail. It introduced millions of viewers to the unanswered questions and the people still grieving. And suddenly, the internet came alive. Reddit threads exploded. Facebook groups formed. True crime YouTubers dug into the timeline, matching surveillance footage with text logs and analyzing every word in the voicemail. Sleuths examined social media activity, cross-referenced old posts, and even speculated on the lipstick handwriting. It felt, for a moment, like momentum was building again. Like someone might finally connect the dots. But then, silence returned. The theories multiplied. The facts remained the same. And the killer, whoever they were, stayed hidden in plain sight. Until 2021. On the morning of September 16, 2021, just shy of 9 years since Faith Hedgepeth was murdered in her apartment, an announcement broke through the silence that had hung over the case for nearly a decade. The Chapel Hill Police Department called a press conference. The tension was immediate. Journalists, families, students, former classmates, everyone who had followed Faith's story, held their breath as a name was finally spoken. Miguel Enrique Salguero Olivares, 28 years old, a former UNC student. He had been arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The shock was instant, not because of the arrest itself. People had waited years for that moment, but because of who had been arrested. Salguero Olivares wasn't a friend of Faith's. He wasn't a known acquaintance. He wasn't Karina's ex-boyfriend. He wasn't anyone who had ever been publicly mentioned in connection with the case. To almost everyone outside of law enforcement, he was a complete stranger. But one thing was certain, his DNA matched the profile found at the crime scene. The same DNA that investigators had quietly been sitting on since 2014. The same sample they had compared against dozens, maybe hundreds, of other men with no results. Now they had their match. According to police, Salguero Olivares had been identified using advancements in DNA testing and genealogy technology. His name surfaced after a relative's DNA led investigators down a path they hadn't been able to explore years earlier. Once they had him, they obtained a direct sample, and it lined up. It was him. Still, the announcement raised more questions than it answered. Who was this man to Faith? Did they know each other at all? Had they met that night at the Thrill? Did he follow her home? Was this a planned encounter or a violent opportunity taken in the dark? The police wouldn't say. They didn't disclose how he entered the apartment, what the motive was, or if he had any known connection to Karina Rosario. They remained tight-lipped about the details, repeating only that the investigation was ongoing and sensitive. And then there was the voicemail. The recording that had haunted the internet for years. Was he one of the voices? Was that him yelling? Was that his hand delivering the fatal blows? Again, no clear answer came. And for many, the math didn't add up. If Salguero Olivares was truly a stranger, how had he gotten in without force? Why had the crime seemed so personal, so angry? What about the lipstick message on the fast food bag? The language, the tone, it all pointed to someone who knew Faith. Someone with something to say. Some theorized that Salguero Olivares wasn't acting alone. That maybe he had been let in. Maybe someone else had lured him there. Or maybe someone had joined him after the fact. Even Faith's family couldn't accept the idea that this was the whole story. Because even with an arrest, the picture wasn't complete. The rage, the positioning of the body, the missing items, the silence of the years in between. It was too much for one man. The arrest of Miguel Salguero Olivares was a massive breakthrough, yes. But it wasn't closure. It wasn't peace. It was the beginning of a new chapter. And this time, everyone was watching. The arrest of Miguel Enrique Salguero Olivares in 2021 brought something that had been missing from the Faith Hedgepeth case for nearly a decade: movement. After years of silence, of vigils and unanswered press conferences, there was suddenly a name, a face, and a charge: first-degree murder. But the relief was short-lived. The arrest affidavit was carefully worded. Investigators cited DNA technology and witness statements as the basis for the arrest, but stopped short of revealing any real detail. What witness? What statement? How did Salguero Olivares know Faith? Had they crossed paths before that night, or was this truly a random encounter? No one would say, and no one knew. The police insisted that more information would come out during trial proceedings, but that trial, even now in mid-2025, has yet to begin. Meanwhile, the deeper people looked, the more questions emerged. The voicemail, the most chilling piece of evidence in the case, suggested more than one person in the room, more than one voice, and more than one witness to what happened. There were 3 voices at least: a woman yelling, another woman possibly pleading, a man speaking over them both. At one point, a line is heard, "I think she needs help." The implication is obvious. Someone knew what was happening. Someone may have stood by. Someone may have helped. So if Salguero Olivares was one of the voices, who were the others? And if he wasn't, then who was? The note left at the crime scene, scrawled in red lipstick on a fast food bag, only deepened the mystery. "I'm not stupid, bitch." The tone was raw, emotional, almost personal. That wasn't the voice of a stranger. That was someone who knew Faith, someone who had something to prove, someone who wanted her to know, in her final moments, that she was being punished. Could Salguero Olivares have written something like that? If so, why? What grudge did he hold? What could she have done to ignite such rage? And then, of course, there's the unshakable presence of the people closest to her. Karina Rosario, her roommate and last known person to see her alive, has never been charged. Her story has never changed. She left the apartment at 4:25 a.m., returned at 11 a.m., and found Faith's body. But for years, people have questioned her timeline, her tone, her decision to bring someone back with her. Did she know something more? Was she protecting someone? And Brandon Edwards, Karina's ex-boyfriend, the one Faith had tried to keep at a distance, was never charged either. His name was whispered early on and often, but officially he was dismissed. His DNA didn't match. But absence of proof isn't proof of absence. The idea that Faith's murder was the work of one man, an outsider, someone who had never been mentioned publicly, who had no known link to her, who managed to enter and leave without being seen, and who just happened to leave his DNA behind, never sat right with many. Even now, it doesn't. Was Salguero Olivares the killer? Or was he just the one who got caught? For 9 years, Faith's family begged for justice. They fought through media silence, police delays, and an indifferent world. And though someone has finally been charged, justice still feels distant, incomplete, because Faith Hedgepeth was not just a murder victim. She was a daughter, a student, a sister, a beacon for her indigenous community, one of far too many women of color whose cases go unsolved, unspoken, and ignored. Her voice may have been captured in a moment of fear, but her story refuses to be silenced. And until every truth is uncovered, the question remains: did one man kill Faith Hedgepeth, or has a conspiracy been hiding in plain sight all along? Faith Hedgepeth was only 19 years old, a dreamer, a scholar, a daughter of the Haliwasaponi tribe, full of purpose, full of promise. She walked into her apartment that night with her whole future ahead of her. By morning it was stolen. An arrest has been made. But the silence around the truth still speaks louder than justice. Who really killed Faith Hedgepeth? Was it a random act of violence, or something far more calculated? And why, after all these years, do so many questions still remain? If her story moved you, don't let it fade into another cold case. Share this video. Keep Faith's name alive. Keep the pressure on. And tell us, do you believe the real killer is behind bars? Or is this just the surface of a deeper conspiracy? Drop your theories in the comments. Let your voice be part of the search for truth. Because justice delayed doesn't have to be justice denied. Subscribe for more stories that demand answers. And for Faith, may the truth one day speak louder than the silence.